Today we're going to be talking about the legal issues in student athletic programs, managing your risks, the 14 duties of care. My name is Janis Doleschal. For 28 years, I was the co-commissioner of sports and athletics for the Milwaukee Public Schools. After I retired from the Milwaukee Public Schools, I started a business called Start Playing Safe and went out to schools to do risk management assessments. What you're going to hear about today, the 14 duties of care, are also contained in training that is offered by the NIAAA. But since the majority of athletic directors, for whatever reason, do not end up taking this training, the WIAA decided that we should go ahead and share it with you in a special tape. We're talking basically about risk management. So what is risk management? Risk management is asking, what if? What if the lights go out in a closed-in gym? What if the lights go out in a pool with no windows? What if there's a riot after a football game? What if? And by asking what if, we then put policies or procedures in writing to address those issues. What it really is taking proactive steps to prevent injuries or challenges to a program before they occur. And it's taking steps also to mitigate a crisis situation when it occurs. A very important point about risk management is that it will not prevent lawsuits. People can sue for whatever they want to sue for if they can find the right attorney. But what appropriate risk management will do is it will aid in defending your actions if you've taken steps to manage the risks that you feel are inherent in your specific athletic program. Now, assuming that you might be sued, how will you be sued? You'll be sued under something called tort law. This is not criminal law. It's civil law. And in civil law, a tort is a private civil wrong which causes harm to some legally protected interest of another person. And that could be based on a local ordinance, a state statute, or a federal law. 4 elements of a tort need to be proven if you're going to be sued. Those 4 elements are duty, breach, proximate cause, and harm. We'll be talking today about the 14 duties of care. Those cares are established by law and by case law. A breach is simply the fact that the duty hasn't been followed. The harm is the harm caused from the breach of the duty. Where the problem comes in is in the cause. And what an attorney will attempt to prove is that the school or the coach not following a duty was the primary cause of the harm. So let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you're living in a city where there is an ordinance that says in 24 hours after a storm of 4 inches or more, you must clean your sidewalk in front of your house and leading up to your door. That's the duty. It's established by city ordinance. However, for whatever reason, you do not clear the snow, and it's now 48 hours after the snowstorm. A person comes up to your front door, slips, and breaks a leg. So breaking the leg would be the harm. That person is going to say that the cause of the person slipping and breaking the arm was the fact that you did not follow the ordinance, therefore you breached a duty established by city ordinance. Now this all seems very straightforward until I start adding other elements to it. Let's say that the person walking up to your front door has the wrong address, so they shouldn't have been walking there in the first place. So then what is the proximate cause? You're not following the duty, or they're going to the wrong address. Let's add another element. This one's slightly different. Let's say the person walking up your front walk has their hands full of packages and is drunk because it's later in the day and they're coming from a party. They slip and fall. Do they slip and fall because you breached the duty of the ordinance to clean your sidewalk? Or did the person fall because the person was drunk? This is how the issue goes when you're sued under tort law. Now, taking that over to an athletic situation, it could be almost anything. But what usually happens is the proximate cause is the most difficult portion of the four elements of a tort. And if an attorney cannot find a good proximate cause, that attorney's going to try and find something else and create a proximate cause. So the first duty to plan, the first duty is the duty to plan. For an athletic director, that means that the athletic director should review and revise all necessary forms prior to the season, especially those that include requiring signatures. If you have a parent-athlete handbook or coach's procedure manual or any other type of written information that is shared with athletes, coaches, and the general public, that should be reviewed on a yearly basis before the school year starts. The AD should also be preparing materials for coaches and agendas for all meetings. The reason for agendas is so that the AD can prove that the meeting occurred and what was covered at that meeting, as well as agendas. The AD should also keep minutes for all meetings that are held. The coach's duty to plan includes planning all practices, preparing game plans, putting training and safety rules in writing for their students. Now, so far we've talked a lot about putting items in writing. Here's another rule. The first one was ask what if. The second one is if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So the coach should be putting all the training and safety rules in writing as well as the awards criteria. In addition, if there is a point system, or even if there isn't a point system used to determine who gets a letter and who doesn't, the coach needs proof. And that's why it's important that both the coach and the athletic director keep accurate records. The second duty of care is the duty to supervise. This is used in almost every suit in which a member of the public or parent sues the school district, in addition to other duties, which we'll talk about later. But the duty to supervise doesn't rest only at the game. The duty to supervise means all practice areas, supervising after the games, supervising in the locker rooms, supervising on the bus. So let's talk about supervising on the bus. Where do your coaches sit? In the front, in the middle, or in the rear? The majority of coaches sit in the front. You cannot see what is happening in the bus if you are sitting in the front of the bus. It's a little bit better if you're sitting in the middle of the bus, but the best place to supervise a bus is to sit in the back of the bus so you can observe, as a coach or as an AD, everything that is occurring in that bus. Another area that needs supervision is the activity bus area. Some schools have activity buses that take students home after practices and after other activities. There should be someone designated as a supervisor in the activity bus area every time there is an activity bus that leaves the school with students. Overnight stays are especially important, even if those overnight stays are in a hotel. If it's in a hotel, I have had coaches go to the ends where they will have a supervisor the entire time. In one case, I had a tennis coach that had a supervisor, a chaperone in the hallway the entire time and had Scotch tape on the doors of the students so they could tell if the door had been opened after the tape was placed on the door. Especially important with those overnight stays is that the students know the rules ahead of time, the parents know the rules ahead of time, so that if something does go wrong, you can take appropriate action, the coach can take appropriate action. So when does the duty of supervise kick in? The duty to supervise kicks in anytime an athletic director or coach is in any official capacity representing the school. Just a point on locker rooms. In many cases, coaches will have an office in the locker room and put paper or pictures over the complete glass of the window so they can have privacy. But the bottom line is there needs to be supervision in the locker room. The other issue that rises with supervision in the locker rooms is what if there is an opposite gender coach? There are several steps that can be taken. One, if there's an assistant coach that's the same gender as the students, that person can supervise in the locker room. If there is another sport also practicing at the same time, one of those coaches can supervise in the locker room. The third means of supervising in the locker room, if there is not an assistant coach or another coach, is by having the captains and the team sit down. Everybody gets the same rules. And the students are told that the captains will be monitoring the behavior in the locker room. And if anything is amiss, the captains will come and get a coach or the coaches, and they will announce from the door when they are coming in, and they will then enter the locker room. The third duty is the duty to assess athlete readiness for practice and competition. This is especially important for the athletic director because it means that the athletic director is responsible for ensuring that all athletes participating are properly screened regarding eligibility and physicals. With respect to the physicals, the issue that comes up most frequently is the date and the fact that the physical that the student had upon initially entering the school is no longer in effect, or there has been a physical that's been brought over for another school. So it's incumbent upon the athletic director to check very carefully the dates on the physicals. It's equally important to check that all eligibility requirements of the WIAA and of the school are being strictly adhered to. No one wants to be in the situation that games are subject to possible forfeitures because an athletic director did not check the eligibility carefully enough. It's especially important to check transfer athletes. It's also important that the athletic director impress upon the coaches the importance of making sure that all of their athletes are cleared before they step onto a field or into a gym or a pool for any practices or any competition. On the part of the coaches, in addition to monitoring eligibility along with the athletic director, is the ongoing monitoring of the condition of athletes. These are high school students. They're not always going to tell the coach when they've been injured. And it's incumbent upon the coach to monitor the condition of the athletes and to determine if a particular athlete is ready for a certain skill or is even ready to go onto the field. Now, one thing that is often forgotten is a HIPAA release. There is a release on the WIAA physical card that will allow medical providers to release patient information to a school and its designated personnel. However, the waiver or the release on the WIAA card does not meet all of the federal requirements regarding content. Now, to my knowledge, there has not been a difficulty with this. However, if you have any difficulties at all for coaches or athletic trainers getting information if an athlete is injured, you can use a HIPAA release that I've prepared and will be available through the WIAA. And in that HIPAA release, you should specify the purpose and extent of the authorization regarding records requested, who will get the records, and for what purpose the student was injured during a practice or a game. The fourth duty is the duty to maintain safe playing conditions. What can often happen in a high school is there is a regular change in the coaching staff or a regular change on an ongoing basis of the athletic director. And if a new athletic director comes in and assumes that all of the facilities are in accordance with NFHS regulations, or assumes that there are appropriate uniforms and equipment, especially safety equipment, for all of the athletes, and then the season starts and the AD and the coach find out that that is not true, it can create major problems for a program. So what this is really saying is that the athletic director, each year, before the season starts and after the season finishes, should inspect all facilities. The coaches should inspect the facilities prior to practices or games and immediately in writing advise the athletic director if there is a problem with the facility. That problem should be reported immediately to proper authorities. Now, in cases where it might be a county facility or a city facility, the notification should go to the athletic director, and the athletic director should notify the county or city facility manager, and that also should be done in writing. The key is taking a preventative approach and not a reactive approach. A good athletic director is proactive and not reactive. The fifth duty is the duty to provide proper equipment. Now, this was alluded to in duty 4. Duty 4 is mainly dealing with facilities, but the fifth duty deals with providing proper equipment that is sanitary, clean, in good working order, and meets all NFHS requirements. All equipment, especially safety equipment in sports that require it, like football, soccer, ice hockey, field hockey. All of the equipment should be checked prior to, during, and after the season, especially with respect to helmets that are used for football, baseball, and softball, and whatever helmets are being used for pole vaulting. Those should be sent out to be checked to see whether they are within the NOCSI requirements. If a coach determines that something is not in compliance or in good working order during the season, the athletic director should be notified immediately. The athletic director should then notify any other proper authorities and address the problem immediately. In one case that I encountered during my tenure as the commissioner for MPS, I received a call from a parent. Parent was not the parent of a student at MPS, but was at a suburban school. and was concerned because in the freshman football program, there had already been, within the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season, 10 clavicle breaks. So I called the athletic director at the school as a courtesy and explained what I had heard. The athletic director had athletic equipment repair come in, and they had to replace over 50 shoulder pads. So it's very, very important to head off those types of problems before they occur. The sixth duty is the duty to instruct properly. If you have a huge turnover in your coaching staff, there should be something that is included in the appointment letter that addresses the issues that the coach needs to address, whether that's going to a coaching clinic or watching tapes or reading books or whatever it is, or getting first aid, CPR, and AED. Whatever it is should be addressed in the appointment letter. And if the coach does not address what the school or district is requiring, the coach should be released at the end of the season. Now, the AED should be checking that lesson plans for practices or game plans, especially for practices, should include warm-ups, some weight training, some cardiovascular conditioning, teaching of skills, the teaching of plays, and a cool down. It is also important for the athletic director to check if the coach is scouting opponents or if the coach has made arrangements for someone else to scout opponents, because that goes directly to the teaching of skills and plays to improve the team. The progression obviously should always be simple to complex, but it's up to the coach to assess whether an athlete is ready physically, mentally, and whether that student is eligible for that sport. With regard to safety, there is an issue called informed consent that we will be discussing under the duty to warn. The seventh duty is the duty to match athletes. And I can just hear it out there. Well, my football team doesn't have that many players, and we go against another school that has a lot more players and bigger players than we have. So how can I address the duty to match athletes? You probably can't. But what you can do is call the athletic director at the opposing school, explain your problem to the athletic director, and ask if they will take that into consideration. Most athletic directors will comply. During practices, the coach has control over whether the duty to match athletes is adhered to or not, by size, by weight, by skill level, and by experience. This is especially important in a sport like wrestling that has weight classes. So it would be incumbent upon a wrestling coach not to take a freshman 90-pounder and ask that 90-pounder to be assisted, listen to me carefully, to be assisted by a varsity wrestler in a heavyweight class that is not matching by size, weight, or skill level or experience. If the coach deals with the skill level, that's one issue. But if you're asking other students to help coach, then be absolutely certain that these 4 criteria are adhered to. Obviously, the experience, you want a more experienced person to work with a less experienced person in a teaching situation, but not in a competing or practicing situation that involves physical contact. And again, you cannot control opposing team members during games, but you can talk to the opposing coach and you can warn your players regarding the situation. The 8th duty is the duty to provide proper physical conditioning. While most schools are adhering to this and are ensuring that all athletes, all female and male athletes, have access to the weight room, there are still schools that are not adhering to this duty, and all athletes do not have access to the weight room on an equitable type of setup. So the athletic director needs to ensure that all athletes have access to the weight room because it is a safety issue. And it's been well proven that athletes who have weight training that is specific to their sports can be safer and can compete at a higher level. Practices should also include flexibility training and cardiovascular conditioning, and we talked about that earlier. The duty to warn is informed consent. This came about as a legal duty as a result of a case in Seattle, Washington, dealing with football helmets. And it came about as a result of that case that schools have a duty to warn athletes and their parents of the types of injuries that could occur when a student participates in interscholastic athletics. Now, all schools should have some type of informed consent statement. That information should be given to parents or guardians and athletes prior to beginning practices, and a signature should be required of both the athlete and the parent. Along with the duty to warn, it's incumbent upon coaches to put their safety rules in writing. An athletic director should never have to hear, "I didn't know," or "you didn't tell me." And you should be able to prove as an athletic director that athletes were told and it was put in writing. When there is a new skill that is being learned, the coaches should explain the safety precautions for that skill and basically what can happen if the skill is not appropriately performed. This is a copy of an informed consent statement. I'd like to draw your attention to parts of this. If you read the second sentence, the injuries could include minor injuries such as bruises or abrasions, muscle strains, sprains, or broken limbs, but the injury could also be a catastrophic injury that could render an athlete paralyzed, and finally, that death could also occur as a result of a catastrophic injury. This has not been proven to stop individuals from going out for interscholastic athletics. It is required by law. You need to have an informed consent statement, and it needs to state as completely as possible what can happen to an athlete during practices or games. The 10th duty of care is a duty to ensure that athletes are covered by medical insurance. Now, this is not required by the WIAA, so I can hear schools already saying, well, the WIAA doesn't require it. However, if you want to be sure that you cover this, this is the reason. It has come up in litigation that schools should inform students that they need to have insurance and ensure that athletes are covered. And if the school does not provide insurance for those students, then the school should show where students could possibly go to have their athletic physical performed. Now, if you require them to show evidence of coverage as part of the registration process regarding insurance, then ask them to bring the insurance card. because it has happened in the past that students will sign that they have insurance, and when something happens and the insurance is checked, it was fraudulently submitted. So, in addition to helping the students find a place for their physical, you can assist them in trying to find some place where they could secure insurance. If you do not require insurance, then you should explain in writing in your athletic handbook and on your website that the school is not liable for medical or conveyance costs, and that the school is suggesting and or requiring that all athletes are covered by some type of insurance. It's up to the school to determine which to do. I'm simply saying that it's a good idea to ensure that athletes are covered by medical insurance, and the way to do that is to require medical insurance for all students participating in athletics. The duty to provide emergency care. Schools assume, because they have an athletic trainer, that emergency care will automatically be provided. But an athletic trainer is not the person who is present at all of the athletic practices. The coach is the one who is present at all athletic practices. Therefore, coaches should be required to have current certification in first aid, CPR, and AED. That's the minimum. If they have that training, then any emergency that comes up during a practice could be handled by the coach on site, and the coach can then make the determination on whether to call 911. Do not assume that 911 will bring someone immediately. It can take as many as 10 minutes, and those 10 minutes can make the difference for some students for life or death. Therefore, I am recommending that an AED be present at all practices. For some schools, it's cost prohibitive, but there are also portable AEDs available. It's up to the school what to do with that, but at the minimum, every coach should have current first aid, CPR, and AED training. Some coaches will also have athletic training or will go to workshops on athletic training. All coaches should also have concussion management training. You can check the WIAA site for the requirements for coaches in the state of Wisconsin. In addition, physicians, athletic trainers, or emergency vehicles should be present at all high-risk events, at large invitationals, and at WIAA tournaments if they are not already required by WIAA requirements. So, my preference is for athletic trainers. They watch the game much more carefully, and by watching the game can tell what movement caused the injury, and very often can help heal the injury faster. The AED should check all necessary first aid equipment, and maintain all first aid kits. These should be issued to every coach, not just the head coach. Every coach should have a fully stocked first aid kit, and that should be present at all practices and games, whether there is an athletic trainer there or not. And I'm sure you all know that unconscious athletes require special clearance before resuming participation, and this is a part of WIAA requirements. So let's talk a little bit about concussion. You can also find information about concussions on the WIAA website. A concussion is a traumatic brain injury. Let's call it what it is. It's a traumatic brain injury. And it interferes with the normal functioning of the brain. It's an injury to the brain. It can be caused by a blow to the head, or it can be caused if a body twists sufficiently to twist the brain in the skull. and it does not necessarily cause unconsciousness. Signs of a possible concussion: students will have, or athletes will have, a dazed or stunned appearance. There will be a change in their level of consciousness or awareness. They might be confused about an assignment in the game or during practice. They might forget plays. They could be unsure of the score of the game or the opponent. They could get clumsy. Their answers could come more slowly than usual. They could show other behavior changes. They could be a loss of consciousness, but that doesn't always follow from a concussion. They could ask repetitive questions or memory concerns. At this point, I will tell you that if an athlete has any hint that he or she might have a concussion, they don't necessarily go to the coach. They'll talk to other players. And the coaches have to be very, very aware of what's going on around them during practices and games and what is occurring with the athletes that are participating in those practices and games, so that if there's any thought that there might be a possible concussion, the coach can question the student. Symptoms of a concussion: once a student has a concussion: headache, nausea, they can be dizzy or unsteady, sensitive to light or noise, feeling mentally foggy, problems with concentration and memory, they can be confused, and their ability to think or process slows down. You should immediately seek emergency medical help if you see these things occurring: loss of consciousness, decreased level of alertness, unusually drowsy, severe worsening headache, seizure, persistent vomiting, or difficulty breathing. Now, the problem is, if you don't share this with parents, if a student may have had a concussion during the game and doesn't tell the coach, or does tell the coach, and the AD and the coach and the athletic trainer feel that there is a concussion, the parents need to be told to watch for these symptoms so that they can seek emergency medical help if these symptoms begin to exhibit once the student is taken home. Here's the reality of concussions. During the 2011-12 school year, 26% of competition injuries and 18% of practice injuries had concussions. 69% of 497 fatalities in football between 1945 and 1999 were due to brain injuries. As I said earlier, the reality is athletes do not tell their coaches. The other reality is that coaches are not fully aware of all the hits that occur on the field, or they may discount the severity of a hit, especially during a football game. Parents discount the severity because they want their kids to play. And believe it or not, these are the 4 sports that have the highest incidence of concussions: football, soccer, wrestling, and believe it or not, cheerleading. Special issues that come up with respect to concussions for high school athletes: they're more vulnerable to concussions. They have a longer period of recovery than adults do. They're less likely to go through medical screening prior to participating. There's no access to a team doctor or trainer when a concussion occurs, which again puts the onus on the coach. May be a higher duty for sports organizations, schools, coaches, or healthcare providers to protect the health and safety of youth. The reason that I say it may be a higher duty is because we are not sure what is going to happen with litigation in the future regarding concussions, or the allegation of concussions, or the allegation of parents that a school did or did not take proper precautions when a student had a concussion. Here's the rule. When in doubt, sit them out. Err on the side of safety. Do not err on the side of we're not going to win if we don't put this student back into the game. Err on the side of safety. And when in doubt, sit them out. If they're going to return to play, utilize graduated steps and return to play, and make sure you secure a written clearance from a medical provider. Now, there have been incidents where the usual medical provider for a student that may have secured a concussion during a practice or game, that medical provider will not give a written clearance at a given moment in time. And some coaches have been known, and some ADs have been known, to send the students to an alternate physician who will give them a written clearance. That is not a valid written clearance from a medical provider. Utilize some sort of written evaluation as completed by a medical provider, such as the acute concussion evaluation form on the WIAA website, and there are various providers available on the website that can give coaches sideline tests they can easily use with their athletes. And again, ADs, it's up to you to monitor the coaches are complying with all of the concussion protocol and concussion procedures. For concussion risk management, for you as an athletic director, develop a written concussion management plan, implement concussion policies, comply. Make sure your coaches comply with concussion policies, and make sure that you as an AD comply with concussion policies and procedures established by the WIAA. Use athletic trainers whenever possible. Train your coaches. Share information with the parents. Use proper safety equipment. Utilize a baseline test for all sports, such as SCAT, which also has a sideline assessment tool and is very easy to use. And make sure, ADs, that you follow all WIAA, DPI, and Wisconsin statutes regarding concussion management. This is a serious issue at this time. It'll be a serious issue for your school if you don't follow the procedures, and you will certainly be opening up your school to probable litigation. It's important that your school has some type of emergency contact card. This is a sample emergency contact card. It's available in hard copy from the WIAA, or it will be available on site where you can download it and use it. This should be on a card. That's why it's called an emergency contact card. It should be on a card. It's half of an 8.5 by 11 sheet. And these cards should be carried in the first aid kit in a Ziploc bag by every coach in a particular sport. Every coach, not just the head coach, because they may be practicing or competing at different sites. So, the emergency contact card gives you the information so that you can call the appropriate people, and so that if 911 is called and emergency personnel come to the site, they will ask some of the questions that you see on the emergency contact card, and they will want some of that information. So please make sure that you have these for all athletes, and that they're current, and that all coaches carry them. You will also have access online to a student-athlete accident report. I know that most schools have accident reports that are used by the school, but there are various issues on the student-athlete accident report that many times are not covered on the school athletic accident form. The first one If emergency personnel were called, list the full names, badges, or ID numbers, and a company of individuals responding to the scene. Why is that included? Because there's a 3-year statute of limitations on civil suits. If a parent decides not to sue, the student can sue if it's within the 3-year period of time when the student becomes of age, and then you're going to need this information. Trust me, the emergency responders are not going to have it. You need to get it at the site on the day when they come to treat the injury. You need to know if the athlete was conveyed to the hospital and which hospital. Were the parents and guardians notified of the accident? Now, why would that be important? Well, first of all, they are the parent or the guardian. But secondly, if an AD and or coach, depending on however you set this up at your school, contacts the parents or the guardians when an accident or an injury occurs to one of the children, it shows that the school is interested in keeping the child safe. And it will help mitigate whatever actions the parents or guardians might consider. Who obtained the written witness statements? When you obtain written witness statements, list everything that's stated here. The names, the dates of birth, the full addresses, at least one telephone contact number of all witnesses from whom written statements were obtained, because you're going to need those also later. And then attach all witness statements and a full written description of how the accident occurred to the student-athlete accident report, and submit all the reports to the AD within 48 hours of the occurrence of the accident, and to anyone else who would require these in your school district. Again, the student-athlete accident report is available, will be available on site on the WIAA website. The 12th duty is a duty to develop an emergency response plan. This pretty much coincides with the duty to provide emergency care. It's used in conjunction with the emergency contact card for athletes. There should be an emergency response plan for all sites at which a team practices or competes, including cross-country. There should be contingency plans in the emergency response plan for severe weather or facility failure. There should also be some statement in there on whether a coach will use personal cell phone or a school cell phone. And in pool areas, there should always be a landline going out to 911 along with the instructions on how to call out. A sample emergency response plan form will be available on the WIAA website. The 13th duty is a duty to provide safe transportation. In the state of Wisconsin, using chartered vehicles switches the liability from the school to the vendor. So in Wisconsin, when a chartered vehicle is used, the vendor assumes liability. Now, this next statement, athletes should never drive other athletes to practices or competitive events. Yes, I understand that there will be instances where this needs to happen. There will be an athletic transportation waiver form on the WIAA site that I've provided, and that's the form you should use. Whenever possible, all athletes should ride the team bus to and from events. Now, the reason that there will be a sample transportation liability waiver on the WIAA site is that it's been established by these two cases, Supreme Court, by the Wisconsin Supreme Court in Yager v. Skiing Enterprises and Atkins v. Swim West. The first one was Yager v. Skiing Enterprises, And when there was another case, which is Adkins v. SwimWest, both of these can be checked easily on the internet. You will see that the major difference is that in Adkins v. SwimWest, the court included the right to negotiate. Well, that's yet to be used in any court case of which I am aware, since the court, in addition to saying that an individual signing a waiver should have the ability to negotiate, the courts never stated what that meant. So for a transportation liability waiver, you've already stated what the policy is for the school on the waiver. They do not have to sign the waiver, but if they want to do what it says on the waiver, pick up their students and drive them home from a practice or an event, then they sign the waiver. The negotiation part is inherent in the waiver because the rule is there and they do not have to sign the waiver unless they choose to either take their students home, have their students drive, have somebody else drive. Criteria for a waiver, just so you know why I've constructed it the way I have. And also, if you're running any clinics during the summer, you should be following these items in the criteria for a waiver. First, must be clear, unambiguous, unmistakable in its meaning, that the signer is waiving all claims due to the negligence of the owner of the facility or the negligence in the case of the school, negligence of the school. Secondly, must clearly and unequivocally communicate to the signer the nature and significance of the document being signed. Third, it must be conspicuous and has to be placed in a separately titled section. You should use larger, different color print, preferably red, italicized or boldface, with a border around it. When you see the transportation waiver, you will see that these criteria are all included in that waiver. It must be separately signed from a participation or any other document like a coaching handbook or a player's handbook or an athlete handbook. It must be separately signed. It cannot be included within the signature for another document. If you have a 2-page contract, it has to be on the front. If it's a multi-page, you have to place it on the first page. If it's on the reverse, you have to state on the front page that it's on the reverse. So your best bet is to do a separate waiver that's 1 page long, even if you are doing a clinic during the summer. The language should be readable. Anybody reading it should understand what it's saying. It shouldn't be written in legal jargon. It should be preceded by a clear and not a misleading heading. Again, you'll see that it says transportation liability waiver in the red box, and preceding the red box is the school policy, or my suggested policy that you follow at the school. And again, I am not in favor of students driving students, but because I understand that that will probably take place at some schools, I've included it on the waiver. The 14th duty is the duty to select, train, and supervise coaches. In many schools, it's the warm body syndrome. We need a warm body, so we'll hire whoever applies. But then what are you going to do with that person? Are you going to train the person, like we talked about earlier? Are you going to give them a letter of appointment, telling them how long, for what period of time they're being appointed, and what issues they need to address? Or are you going to establish hiring forms and procedures, which would include an application form, the procedures for interviewing, how many people will be on an interview board, and what questions will be asked? How are you going to be sure that the school is adhering to WIAA requirements for non-teacher coaches, because you will be hiring some non-teacher coaches. Prior to the season, the AD should discuss the job requirements and the job expectations with the coaches, and at the same time, discuss areas of concern and what expectations are being placed upon the coach to address those areas of concern. In the duty to supervise coaches, the athletic director should visit coaches' practices and games on a regular basis. And if there's something amiss, the AD should not wait to intervene at the end of the season and then simply release the coach because something might happen. So you want to intervene as soon as possible. If there is still a school that has a teacher contract, and as a part of that teacher contract includes coaches in the same bargaining unit as the teacher, then the AD, if he or she is a teacher, must sit down with the principal and establish a clear line of authority if that teacher is in the same bargaining unit as the coach. There is a requirement in the Wisconsin state statutes that I've included for you, since this is a statewide requirement. It's Wisconsin State Statute 175.22. And what I've included is the section that's the policy on privacy in locker rooms. And the first section in any statute includes the definitions. So what you're seeing here is the definitions. The person includes the state. Recording device means any camera, video recorder, or any other device that can be used to record or transfer images. And that any person that owns or operates a locker room, and any person that owns or operates a locker room, this is not restricted to schools, in the state of Wisconsin, shall adopt a written policy. So the shall means you have to do it. That does all of the following. Specifies who may enter and remain in the locker room to interview or seek information from any individual in the locker room, coach or athlete. Specifies the recording devices that may be used in the locker room and the circumstances under which they may be used. It should reflect the privacy interests of the individuals who use the locker room, and it must specify that no person may use a cell phone to capture, record, or transfer a representation of a nude or partially nude person in the locker room. And that means that the school district must have a written policy that addresses all four of these issues. So, to conclude, what are the responsibilities of athletic administrators? To monitor programs, to monitor funds, especially booster club funds. And we'll talk a little bit more about that under the Title IX presentation that will also be available to you. The athletic director should be monitoring the scholarships to make sure that as many students as possible receive the information regarding scholarships available to them, and that's not just athletic scholarships. The athletic director should monitor uniforms, equipment, facilities, should monitor coaches for compliance with all regulations. It's up to the athletic administrator to provide equal access to tutoring, medical and athletic training personnel, and facilities. With respect to the tutoring, some schools operate special study halls after school for athletes. They must be available to all male and female athletes in all sports. And if there are any inequities, it's incumbent upon the athletic administrator to address the inequities in an expedient fashion. Finally, consistency. ADs, athletic administrators, must establish a basic philosophy of high school sports and adhere to it. Athletic directors should be consistent regardless of who is concerned. There will be times when pressures are placed upon an athletic director because of how much money a parent has donated to a school or how much money a parent has donated to an athletic program. It's incumbent upon the athletic director to be consistent regardless of who is concerned and to not tolerate rules that will be broken by anyone. If there are certain circumstances when deviations become necessary, they should be few and far between, and they should be totally defensible. I'll give you an example on that. When Jeffrey Dahmer was killing people in Milwaukee, he killed the brother of an athlete at one of my schools. The athlete's grades immediately tumbled. The young man was a soccer player. The athletic director in the school asked if there was anything I could do to help that soccer player maintain eligibility. Between the school and myself, we developed criteria that the student had to adhere to, and that criteria was adhered to. It was sent to the parents and the student in writing. That is a deviation that becomes necessary. You are not going to find very many of those. And that one was totally defensible. Ultimately, it's an issue of how much you value integrity, including yourself and your reputation, and fair play for everyone. And please remember the two cardinal rules. Ask what if, and if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Thank you. I've included the 14 duties of care as a reference for you.